My parents spent my $187,000 college fund on my sister's wedding. And for 10 years, I didn't even know it existed. I was 17 when I first heard the word college fund. My grandparents had sat me down in their living room, the one that always smelled like cinnamon and old books, and handed me a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a check. It was a statement, a brokerage account with my name on it, opened the day I was born. Every birthday, every Christmas, every small inheritance from a great aunt I never met, it had all gone into one place. "This is your future," my grandmother said. "Your grandfather and I wanted you to start life without the weight we carried." The number on that paper was $187,342.17. I remember staring at the digits, not quite believing that so much security could be compressed into a few black numbers on white paper. I was supposed to start college in the fall. I had already been accepted to a university 3 hours away, a school I'd chosen partly because it was far enough to feel like freedom but close enough to come home for Thanksgiving. My parents had nodded when I showed them the acceptance letter. My father said, "We'll figure it out." My mother said, "There are always loans." But now there didn't have to be. My grandparents had figured it out for me. They had been quietly building this safety net since before I could walk. I hugged them both, so hard my grandmother laughed and said I was going to crack her ribs. My grandfather patted my back and said, "Just promise us one thing. Use it wisely, and never let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve it." I promised. I meant it. That night, I brought the statement home. I placed it on the kitchen counter, next to the fruit bowl. My mother was stirring a pot on the stove. My father was reading the mail. My sister, Sarah, 2 years older, already married to a man named Derek who sold insurance and had a laugh that filled a room, was on the couch scrolling through her phone. "Guess what?" I said, holding up the paper. "I don't need loans. Grandma and Grandpa saved everything." My mother stopped stirring. My father looked up. Sarah's eyes lifted from her screen. I explained it quickly. The account, the balance, the plan to use it for tuition, books, housing. I thought they'd be happy. Instead, there was a long silence. Then my mother said, "That's generous." My father said nothing. He folded a piece of mail and set it down carefully, like it might explode. Sarah stood up. $187,000. Her voice had an edge I didn't recognize. "For college." "Yes," I said. "For college." She looked at my mother. Something passed between them. A look I couldn't decode. A silent conversation that seemed to fill the kitchen with static. Then Sarah smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, "good for you." I should have noticed then. I should have paid attention to the way my mother suddenly became very interested in the pasta water, the way my father's jaw tightened, the way Sarah picked up her phone and started typing furiously. But I was 17. I was excited. I was naive. That was the first week of May. By the end of the month, everything had changed. It started with small comments. At dinner, my mother would mention how expensive weddings had become. Sarah's wedding, the previous summer, had been modest, or so I'd thought. My parents had paid for the venue, the caterer, the photographer. Sarah and Derek had covered the rest. Or so I believed. "We did what we could," my mother said one night, shaking her head. "But you know how it is. Everything costs twice what you expect." My father nodded. "We're still paying off some of it." I didn't think much of it. I was focused on dorm assignments and scholarship essays and the growing stack of books I wanted to bring with me. I visited the campus in June. I picked my classes. I messaged my future roommate on social media. Everything was falling into place. Then, in July, my grandparents called. "We need to talk to you," my grandmother said. Her voice was thin, fragile in a way I'd never heard before. "Your grandfather had a small procedure. Nothing serious, but it made us think about paperwork." I drove to their house that afternoon. The cinnamon smell was still there, but something else hung in the air, a kind of heaviness, like the house was holding its breath. My grandfather sat me down in the same living room, in the same chair. But this time, there was no statement in his hand. "We transferred the college fund into a custodial account years ago," he said slowly. "Your parents were listed as custodians until you turned 18. That's standard." I nodded, not understanding where this was going. "Last month," he continued, "your mother called us. She said there were some expenses, some bills that needed to be handled. She asked if we could authorize a withdrawal from the account. Just a small one. My grandmother took over. We said no. That money was for your education. We made that clear. But as custodians, your parents still had access. My heart started beating faster. They withdrew money. They withdrew everything. The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at my grandfather. He stared back, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands trembling slightly. They closed the account, he said. The entire balance. $187,342.17. Transferred out on June 15th. I felt the world tilt. That's not possible. They wouldn't do that. My grandmother reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. We called the bank. The funds were moved to a joint account in your parents' names. 2 days later, a check was written to a wedding venue. Wedding venue? Your sister's wedding venue. The original one. The one she wanted but couldn't afford. They're redoing it. A second ceremony. A vow renewal. With all the upgrades she didn't get the first time. I stood up. I don't remember deciding to stand. My legs just moved. They used my college fund for a wedding do-over. My grandfather closed his eyes. I am so sorry. We tried to stop it. We called the bank. We called a lawyer. But because they were the custodians, there was nothing we could do until you turn 18. And by then, the money was already gone. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just stood there, replaying every dinner conversation, every sideways glance between my mother and Sarah, every time my father fell silent when I talked about college. They had known. They had planned this. I drove home in a daze. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road, and I remember thinking that the world looked different now. Dimmer, smaller, less kind. When I walked through the front door, my mother was in the kitchen. She smiled when she saw me. How were your grandparents? I didn't answer. I walked past her, up the stairs, into my room. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall. An hour later, my father knocked. Your mother says you seemed upset. They told me about the money. A long pause. Then, your grandparents don't understand the full picture. Sarah and Derek were struggling. The wedding debt was crushing them. We thought we were helping the family. That money was for my education. You can still go to college. There are loans. Scholarships. We'll help you figure it out. I looked at him. In the dim light of my room, he looked smaller than I remembered. Older. Weaker. You stole from me. His face tightened. We didn't steal. We're your parents. We made a decision for the family. A decision that took my future. He didn't respond. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, jaw working like he wanted to say something else. Finally he said, Sarah's your sister. Family helps family. And then he left. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, running through every possibility. Could I sue them? Could I get the money back? I was still 17. I had no lawyer, no resources, no power. My grandparents had already consulted an attorney who told them the same thing. Because the account was custodial, my parents had legal authority to withdraw the funds before I turned 18. They hadn't broken the law. They had broken me. The next few weeks were a blur. My mother tried to act normal, making my favorite meals, asking about my dorm decorations. My father offered to co-sign loans. Sarah came over with Derek, laughing about the upgraded floral arrangements for her vow renewal, talking about the new photographer they'd hired. No one mentioned the $187,342.17. It was like a ghost in the room, present but unacknowledged. I stopped speaking to them. I moved through the house like a shadow, counting the days until I could leave. My grandparents, heartbroken and furious, offered to help with tuition, whatever they could manage from their retirement savings. But it wasn't enough. Not even close. On my 18th birthday, I did 2 things. I opened my own bank account at a credit union across town, and I requested a full transaction history from the original brokerage. It arrived 10 days later in a thick envelope. I opened it on my bed, spreading the pages across my comforter. Page after page of deposits, interest accruals, and then the final 2 pages. June 15th, a transfer of $187,342.17 to a joint account in the names of Mark and Diane Henderson. June 17th, a check written to the Grand Pavilion for $187,342.17. The memo line, in my mother's handwriting, read, Sarah and Derek, final balance. I stared at those words for a long time. Final balance. As if my future was a debt to be settled. I photocopied every page. I put the originals in a safe deposit box. And I made a promise to myself I would not let this go. I would not pretend it never happened. I would find a way to make them answer for what they did. But at 18, with no money and no lawyer, all I could do was wait. I waited for 10 years. And when the moment finally came, I didn't just bring the bank records. I brought everything. For 10 years, I watched my sister live the life my money bought her. I don't mean that bitterly. I mean it factually. Sarah and Derek's vow renewal at the Grand Pavilion became the centerpiece of her identity. The photos, there were hundreds of them, lined the walls of my parents' house. A gallery of my stolen future, displayed like a victory trophy. Every time I came home for holidays, I saw them. The cascading floral arches, the crystal chandeliers, the custom table settings, the photographer who cost more than my first car. Sarah would point to a picture and say, "Wasn't it beautiful?" And my mother would nod, her eyes soft with pride. My father would clear his throat and change the subject. No one ever mentioned where the money came from. I tried to move on. I took out loans for community college. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at a coffee shop, nights as a virtual assistant for a real estate agent. I transferred to a state university after 2 years, graduated with a degree in accounting, and landed a job at a mid-sized firm. I paid off my loans in 7 years. Every payment felt like a small act of reclamation, not of the money, but of my dignity. But I never forgot. I kept the bank records in my safe deposit box, along with the photocopied transaction history. I added to them over the years, emails my grandparents had forwarded, a letter from the brokerage confirming the date of closure, a handwritten note my mother had once left on my dresser that said, "We did what we thought was best." I didn't know what I was collecting. Evidence for a crime that wasn't technically a crime. Proof of a betrayal that no court would recognize. All I knew was that I couldn't throw any of it away. The turning point came on a Tuesday in October. I was 28, working late at the office, when my phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother. "Your grandfather is in the hospital. Nothing urgent, but you should come." I drove 2 hours through rain, so heavy the highway lines disappeared. When I got to the hospital, my grandfather was sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. My grandmother was in the chair beside him, holding his hand. My parents were in the hallway, talking to a nurse. My grandfather smiled when he saw me. "There's my girl." I sat on the edge of his bed. "What happened?" Hart decided to remind me I'm not 20 anymore. "They're keeping me overnight for observation." He squeezed my hand. "But while you're here, there's something I need to tell you." He reached for a small manila envelope on the bedside table. It was worn, the corners soft, as if it had been handled many times. "I've been working with a lawyer," he said quietly. "Not the one we talked to 10 years ago. A different one. A specialist in estate litigation." My grandmother leaned forward. "We never stopped being angry about what they did. But we didn't have the fight in us back then. We were older, tired. We let it go because we didn't know what else to do." "I didn't let it go," my grandfather said. "I just waited." He opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a legal memo, dated 6 months earlier. I scanned it quickly, my eyes catching phrases like breach of fiduciary duty, custodial account misuse, and statute of limitations exceptions in cases of fraudulent concealment. "The lawyer says we might have a case," my grandfather said. "Not for theft, the bank already told us that, but for something else. Your parents were custodians. They had a legal obligation to act in your best interest. Using a custodial account for their own benefit, for your sister's benefit, could be a breach of that duty." My heart was pounding. "But it's been 10 years. Isn't there a time limit?" "There is. But if we can prove they concealed what they did, that they actively hid it from you until you were 18, the clock might start later." He tapped the memo. "The lawyer wants to know if you're willing to pursue it. It would mean depositions, discovery, and it would mean your parents would have to sit in a room and explain, under oath, what they did with that money." I looked at my grandmother. She nodded slowly. "We're not doing this for us. We're doing this for you. And for your grandfather's peace of mind." My grandfather's eyes were wet. "I'm 83 years old. I don't have many years left to make things right. But I have enough. I took the memo. I read it 3 times. Then I said, I'll do it. The next 6 months were a masterclass in patience. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Elena Cortez, gathered documents, filed motions, and prepared for what she called the long game. She explained that we weren't suing for the money directly. We were suing for breach of fiduciary duty, which, if successful, could result in a judgment for damages plus interest. 10 years of interest on $187,342.17 adds up. But first, we needed to prove concealment. We needed to show that my parents had not only taken the money, but had actively hidden the truth from me until I was legally an adult. That's when I started digging in earnest. I requested bank records from the credit union where my parents had their joint account. I subpoenaed communications from the Grand Pavilion. I found the original wedding planner for Sarah's vow renewal and interviewed her over the phone. Piece by piece, a picture began to emerge. The wedding planner remembered my mother clearly. She was very specific about what she wanted, she told me. She said they'd come into some money unexpectedly. A family fund. She kept saying, we never could have done this before. I remember because she seemed almost giddy about it. I asked if my mother had ever mentioned where the money came from. She said it was a gift, the planner replied. From her parents. For the family. I felt something cold settle in my chest. My mother had told people my grandparents had given her the money. She had made it sound like a generous gift, not a theft. She had been lying for 10 years. The next discovery came from the brokerage itself. Elena obtained a copy of the original transfer authorization. It was signed by both my parents. But the date was July 15th, a full month after the money had been moved. I stared at the document. How can the transfer authorization be dated after the transfer happened? Elena smiled grimly. It can't. Not legally. They backdated the form. Or they had someone at the bank help them do it. Either way, it's fraud. We found more. A memo from the bank manager, dated June 10th, noting a phone call from my mother requesting immediate access to custodial funds. An email from my father to my sister, sent the same day, with the subject line, good news. The body of the email was 1 sentence. Mom and I figured out how to cover the pavilion. Don't say anything to your sister yet. Don't say anything to your sister yet. I read that line over and over. They had known, from the very beginning, that what they were doing was wrong. They had planned it. They had hidden it. And they had counted on my silence, my youth, my inability to fight back. By the time we were ready to file the lawsuit, I had a binder 3 inches thick. Bank statements, email chains, signed affidavits from the wedding planner and the brokerage representative. Copies of my grandparents' wills, showing their intent to fund my education. A timeline that traced every step of the conspiracy. And then, 1 week before the filing, my grandfather died. It was sudden but not unexpected. His heart had been failing for months. He passed in his sleep, with my grandmother holding his hand. I drove to their house the next morning, and when I walked into the living room, I saw the envelope on the coffee table. The same manila envelope he'd shown me in the hospital. Inside, there was a handwritten note. I started this fight because I couldn't stand the thought of them getting away with it. Finish it for me. Not for the money. For the truth. Grandpa. I put the note in my safe deposit box, next to the bank records. And the next day, Elena filed the lawsuit. My parents were served on a Saturday morning. My mother called me 47 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again. And again. I counted 13 calls before I finally turned off my phone. When I listened to the voicemails, they started with confusion. Honey, we got some papers in the mail. I think it's a mistake. They moved to concern. You're not actually doing this, are you? After everything we've done for you. And they ended with something I'd never heard in my mother's voice before, fear. You're going to destroy this family. Is that what you want? I saved every voicemail. The next call came from my father. He didn't leave a message. But my sister did. Sarah's voice was sharp, angry, nothing like the soft tone she used in family photos. How dare you, she said. How dare you drag our parents through this? You think you're the only one who deserved that money. I needed it. Derek and I were drowning. Mom and Dad helped us. That's what families do. You don't get to rewrite history because you're bitter. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Then I added it to the binder. The discovery phase was brutal. My parents hired a lawyer, a retired judge who specialized in family mediation. They denied everything. They claimed they had always intended to repay the money. They said my grandparents had approved the withdrawal. They offered to settle for $50,000, paid over 5 years. Elena laughed when she saw the offer. They're not even close. I told her I didn't want to settle. I wanted a deposition. I wanted to sit across from my parents and ask them, under oath, why they had stolen my future and called it love. Elena warned me it would be hard. You'll hear things you don't want to hear. They'll try to make you the villain. Are you ready for that? I thought about my grandfather's note. I thought about the binder full of evidence. I thought about the voicemails sitting on my phone, each one a testament to their guilt. I've been ready for 10 years, I said. The deposition was scheduled for March. But before that, I received an unexpected piece of evidence, something that would change everything. A letter, handwritten on cream-colored stationery, arrived at my apartment. No return address. The postmark was local. I opened it with shaking hands. It was from my father. I know you think we stole from you, and maybe we did, but you have to understand, Sarah was drowning. Her marriage was falling apart. Derek had lost his job. The wedding debt was the least of it. She was talking about leaving him. Your mother and I couldn't watch her fail. The money was supposed to be a loan. We always meant to pay it back. But then you were so angry, and your grandparents got involved, and it was easier to just not talk about it. I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud of any of it. Your mother doesn't know I'm writing this. She'd say I'm giving you ammunition. Maybe I am, but I want you to know I was wrong. We were wrong. And I'm sorry. I don't expect you to drop the lawsuit. I don't expect you to forgive us. But I wanted you to hear it from me before the lawyers take over and turn this into something it was never meant to be. I love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it. Dad, I read the letter 6 times. Then I called Elena. We're not settling, I told her. But I wanted to pose my father first. And I want you to ask him about this letter. She paused. You're willing to use it against him? He said he wanted the truth to come out. Let's give him exactly what he asked for. The deposition was 3 weeks away. I spent those weeks preparing, reviewing the binder, memorizing the timeline. My sister called twice more, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. My mother sent a text that said, "Your father is losing sleep over this. Are you happy now?" I didn't answer. I was waiting. I had been waiting for 10 years. A few more weeks was nothing. And when the day finally came, I walked into that conference room with every piece of evidence, every recorded conversation, every documented lie. I was ready to watch them explain how they spent my future on a party and called it family. If you've ever been excluded by your family, if you've ever been told that your needs come second, that your future is negotiable, that your pain is just collateral damage in someone else's happiness, drop a broken heart in the comments. You're not alone. I know because I sat across from my parents in a conference room and watched them try to explain away 10 years of silence. The deposition was scheduled for 9 a.m. in a downtown law office. I arrived an hour early, my binder under my arm, my hands steady even though my stomach was in knots. Elena met me in the lobby. She was dressed in a sharp black suit, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. "Your parents are already here," she said quietly. "Your father looks like he hasn't slept in a week. Your mother keeps asking to speak with you privately. I've told her no." I nodded. "What about my sister?" "She's not required to be here." But she showed up anyway. She's sitting in the waiting room. I felt a flash of something. Anger, maybe, or just exhaustion. Sarah had spent 10 years pretending the money was a gift. Now she wanted to watch me confront our parents, as if she were just a spectator. "Let's get this over with," I said. The conference room was sterile, a long oak table, 12 leather chairs, a video camera in the corner. My parents sat on one side, their lawyer, a gray-haired man named Mr. Hollister, beside them. My father was staring at his hands. My mother's eyes were fixed on the door, and when I walked in, she stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. "Please sit down, Mrs. Henderson," Elena said. "We'll begin in a moment." My mother looked at me. Her lips parted, like she wanted to say something, but then Mr. Hollister touched her arm, and she sat back down. I took a seat at the end of the table, facing them. Elena positioned herself beside me. A court reporter set up her machine in the corner. I didn't look at my sister, though I could feel her presence in the hallway. I didn't look at my mother's pleading expression. I looked at my father. He was the one who had written the letter. He was the one who had said he was sorry. And today, he was going to have to say it under oath. Elena began with the basics. Names, dates, the establishment of the custodial account. My parents answered in clipped, careful sentences. Their lawyer had clearly coached them. They admitted the account existed. They admitted they had access. They admitted the balance. Then Elena pulled out the transaction record. Mr. Henderson, can you tell me what happened on June 15th, 10 years ago? My father cleared his throat. We transferred the funds. You transferred the funds. Where were they transferred to? Our joint account. And why did you transfer them? My mother answered before he could. Because we needed them. Sarah was in a difficult situation. We wanted to help. Elena turned to her. Mrs. Henderson, I'll address you shortly. Please let your husband answer. My father's jaw tightened. We needed to pay for some family expenses. Family expenses. Can you be more specific? He glanced at my mother. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. But Elena was already sliding another document across the table. This is a check written from your joint account on June 17th. It's made out to the Grand Pavilion in the amount of $187,342.17. The memo line reads, in your wife's handwriting, Sarah and Derek, final balance. Would you say that qualifies as a family expense? My father's face drained of color. Yes. It was for my daughter's wedding. Your daughter's wedding. Which daughter? He didn't answer. Mr. Henderson, which daughter? Our older daughter. Sarah. And what was your younger daughter's understanding of this transaction? I watched my father's throat move as he swallowed. She didn't know. She didn't know what, exactly. She didn't know we were taking the money. When did she find out? Her grandparents told her. Later. Elena nodded slowly. She pulled out the next document, the transfer authorization with the July date. Mr. Henderson, this is the authorization form for the transfer. It's dated July 15th, but the transfer itself happened on June 15th. Can you explain that discrepancy? Silence. My mother's hand was gripping the edge of the table. Mr. Hollister leaned forward. Objection. The form was signed on the date indicated. Any discrepancy in the processing is a matter for the bank. Elena didn't blink. I'm not asking about processing, Mr. Hollister. I'm asking Mr. Henderson if he signed this form on July 15th, after the money had already been moved. My father's voice was barely a whisper. I don't remember. You don't remember? Perhaps this will help. Elena produced the bank manager's memo, the one dated June 10th, noting my mother's call requesting immediate access. Mrs. Henderson called the bank on June 10th to request access to custodial funds. 4 days later, the money was transferred. 22 days after that, you signed an authorization form that was dated July 15th. Does that timeline refresh your memory? My father said nothing. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he shook his head. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. I signed it when they told me to, he said. I didn't look at the date. Who told you to sign it? The bank. My wife. I don't remember. Elena shifted gears. She brought out the email my father had sent to Sarah on June 10th, the one that said, "Don't say anything to your sister yet." She read it aloud, her voice flat and clinical. Mr. Henderson, you sent this email the same day your wife called the bank. In it, you tell your older daughter not to say anything to your younger daughter. Why? He closed his eyes. Because we knew she'd be upset. You knew she'd be upset. So you deliberately concealed the transfer from her. We were going to tell her. We wanted to wait until after the wedding. The wedding that was funded with her college money. Objection, Mr. Hollister said. Counsel is testifying. Withdrawn, Elena said smoothly. Mr. Henderson, did you or your wife ever inform your younger daughter about the transfer before she turned 18? No. Did you ever inform her after she turned 18? He looked at me then. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink. We talked around it. We never sat her down and explained. You never told her that you had taken her college fund and spent it on her sister's vow renewal. You never offered to repay it. You never acknowledged it until she discovered the truth from her grandparents. Is that correct? Yes. Elena paused. She let the word hang in the air. Then she pulled out my father's letter, the one he'd sent to me weeks earlier, and slid it across the table. Mr. Henderson, did you write this letter? He stared at it. His face crumpled. Yes. In this letter, you say, I know you think we stole from you. And maybe we did. Is that an accurate statement? He didn't answer right away. My mother was shaking her head, muttering something under her breath. Mr. Hollister held up a hand. Mr. Henderson, you don't have to. It's accurate, my father said. His voice cracked. We took the money. We spent it. We never paid it back. My mother made a sound, half gasp, half sob. Mark, don't. But he kept going. I didn't want to do it. Your mother said we had to. Sarah was crying every night. Derek was threatening to leave. I thought if we just helped them get through it, everything would be okay. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about what it would do to you. He was talking to me now, not to Elena. His face was red, his hands trembling. I've carried this for 10 years. Every time I saw you struggle with loans, every time you worked double shifts, I knew it was my fault. And I didn't have the courage to fix it. My mother stood up. Stop it. Stop. This isn't how we agreed. Sit down, Diane, Mr. Hollister said sharply. Sit down right now. She didn't sit. She turned to me, her eyes wild. You wanted this, didn't you? You wanted to humiliate us. You wanted to make your father cry in front of a lawyer and a court reporter. Congratulations. Are you happy now? I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was watching my father, this man who had been a stranger to me for 10 years, finally breaking apart. Elena's voice was calm. Mrs. Henderson, you'll have your turn to testify. But right now, your husband is under oath. Please take your seat. My mother stood there for a long moment. Then she sank back into her chair, her face a mask of fury and fear. Elena turned back to my father. Mr. Henderson, you said you intended to repay the money. Did you ever make any attempt to do so? No. Did you ever set aside funds for that purpose? No. Did you ever discuss repayment with your daughter? He shook his head. I didn't know how to start. So the truth is, you took $187,342.17 from your younger daughter's custodial account, spent it entirely on your older daughter's wedding, concealed the transfer, and then did nothing for 10 years. Is that accurate? He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Yes. Elena closed her binder. I have no further questions at this time. The room fell silent. The court reporter stopped typing. Mr. Hollister leaned over to whisper to my parents, but I wasn't watching them anymore. I was watching the door, where Sarah had been standing in the hallway. She was gone. I don't know what I expected to feel in that moment. Relief. Vindication. Instead, I felt something heavier, the weight of 10 years finally settling, not as justice but as grief. My father had admitted it. He had confessed. And somehow, that made the loss feel more real, not less. Elena touched my arm. You okay? I nodded. What happens now? Now we see if they want to settle. If not, we go to trial. She looked at Mr. Hollister. I believe we've established a clear pattern of concealment and breach of duty. I'll have a settlement proposal to you by the end of the week. Mr. Hollister nodded tightly. He was already gathering his papers, ushering my parents toward the door. My mother didn't look at me, but my father did. He paused at the threshold, his shoulders slumped, his face a ruin of exhaustion and shame. I meant what I wrote, he said quietly. I'm sorry. And then he was gone. I sat in that conference room for a long time after everyone left. Elena brought me a cup of coffee. I didn't drink it. I just held it, feeling the warmth seep through the paper cup, thinking about the binder full of evidence and the voicemails and the letter my father had written. You did what you had to do, Elena said. Did I? I looked at her. He apologized. He admitted it. What else do I want? That's for you to decide. But the law doesn't care about apologies. It cares about accountability. I thought about my grandfather's note, still tucked in my safe deposit box. Finish it for me. Not for the money. For the truth. The truth had come out. My father had said the words out loud under oath. The money was gone, and it would never come back. But maybe that wasn't the point anymore. I finished my coffee and stood up. Let's see what they offer. But what came next, what my parents proposed as a settlement, was so insulting, so breathtaking in its audacity, that I realized I hadn't seen the full picture yet. And before I could make a decision, something else happened that changed everything. Something that proved, once and for all, that my sister had known far more than she'd ever admitted. The settlement offer arrived 3 days after the deposition. Elena forwarded it to me with a single line. "You need to see this." It was worse than I expected. My parents proposed to pay me $25,000, total, over the next 10 years. No interest. No acknowledgement of wrongdoing beyond the letter my father had written. And buried in the fine print was a clause that would require me to drop all claims, sign a non-disparagement agreement, and agree never to discuss the case publicly. I called Elena immediately. "This is a joke. It's an insult," she agreed. "But it tells us something. They're not serious about making things right. They're trying to make you go away. What happens if we go to trial? We win. I'm confident of that. But it will take months, maybe longer. And it will cost. Your grandparents' estate is covering the legal fees, but there's a limit." I thought about my grandfather, about his note. I thought about the deposition, my father's confession, the way my mother had tried to shut him up. I thought about the years of silence, the loans, the double shifts, the pictures on their walls. "I don't want to drag this out," I said, "but I'm not signing that." Then we counter. "But before I send anything, you should see this." She sent me another document. It was an email recently obtained through discovery from Sarah to my mother. The date was 3 weeks after the transfer, before my grandparents had told me the truth. The subject line was Pavilion Deposit Confirmation. I read it twice. Sarah had written, "Thank you so much for making this happen. I know it wasn't easy. I'll never tell her, I promise. This stays between us." I stared at the words. I'll never tell her. Sarah had known, from the very beginning, where the money came from. She had known, and she had promised to keep it a secret. She knew, I whispered. She knew, Elena confirmed. And she actively participated in the concealment, which means we can add her to the case if we want. I sat back in my chair. All those years, all those family dinners, all those times Sarah had posted photos of the vow renewal, all those moments she had looked at me and said nothing. She had known. She had promised to protect the secret. "What do you want to do?" Elena asked. I thought about my sister, about the voicemail she'd left, the anger, the entitlement, about the way she'd sat in the waiting room during the deposition, ready to watch, not to testify. "I don't want to sue my sister," I said finally, "but I want her to know that I know. And I want my parents to understand that this isn't going away just because they want it to." Elena smiled. "Then let's craft a counteroffer they can't ignore." We spent the next week building the counterproposal. We asked for the full amount of the original fund, adjusted for 10 years of compounded interest, just over $340,000. We demanded that my parents sign a written acknowledgement of their actions to be placed in my grandparents' family records. And we insisted on a meeting, face to face, with all 4 of us present. I also included a personal condition. My sister would attend, and she would be the one to explain, in her own words, why she had promised to keep the secret. Elena warned me the meeting would be hard. They'll try to rewrite the conversation. They'll make themselves the victims. You need to be ready for that. I was ready. The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon in Elena's conference room, the same room where my father had broken down. I arrived early again, but this time I didn't wait in the lobby. I sat at the head of the table, my binder closed in front of me, and waited. My parents arrived first. My mother walked in with her back straight, her chin high, as if she were entering a negotiation, not an accountability session. My father followed, looking smaller than I remembered. Behind them came Sarah, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. Derek was not with her. No one spoke for a long moment. Then my mother sat down across from me and said, "I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't rise to the bait. "I want to talk about the money." "You'll get your money," she snapped. "We've agreed to the terms. That should be enough." "It's not enough." I opened my binder and pulled out the email Sarah had sent. I slid it across the table. "I want to talk about this." Sarah's face went white. My mother picked up the paper, read it, and set it down without expression. "You promised never to tell me," I said, looking at my sister. "You promised to keep it a secret. Why?" Sarah's hands were shaking. "Because I knew you'd be angry. I was 17. I was about to start college. You knew that money was meant for my education, and you helped them hide it. I was drowning." Her voice cracked. Derek was going to leave. I thought if I just got through the wedding, everything would be okay. I didn't think about. I didn't think. You didn't think for 10 years? She looked at me then, really looked. I thought about it every day. Every time I saw you struggle. Every time you picked up an extra shift. I knew what we'd done. I just couldn't admit it. My mother slammed her hand on the table. Enough. We're here to settle, not to relitigate. You're getting your money. What more do you want? I turned to her. I want you to say it. I want you to say out loud that you took my college fund without my knowledge or consent. That you spent it on my sister's wedding. That you hid it from me for 10 years. And that you were wrong. She stared at me. Her jaw was tight. Her nostrils flared. For a moment, I thought she would refuse. Then my father spoke. We were wrong. My mother whipped her head toward him. Mark, we were wrong, he said again louder. We took your money. We spent it. We lied about it. And we never made it right. His voice broke. I'm sorry. I know sorry isn't enough, but I'm sorry. My mother was crying now, tears of rage or grief or both. Sarah had her face in her hands. My father was staring at the table, his shoulders shaking. I waited. I waited for my mother to say something, to admit anything. She didn't. She sat there, silent and furious, her arms crossed, her face a wall. Okay, I said finally. I'll accept the settlement, but I have one more condition. My mother's eyes snapped to me. What? The photos. All the pictures from the vow renewal. The ones in your house, the ones in Sarah's house, the ones online. I want them taken down. Not because I want to erase the day, but because I don't want to walk into my parents' home and see my stolen future on the walls. Silence. My mother looked at my father. He nodded slowly. We'll take them down, he said. My mother didn't agree, but she didn't disagree either. We signed the settlement that afternoon. I walked out of the building with a check for $340,000. Not enough to cover the years of struggle, but enough to finally feel secure. More than the money, though, I walked out with something I hadn't had in a decade, the truth. The truth that my father knew he was wrong. The truth that my sister had carried the guilt for years. The truth that my mother would probably never admit her role, but that everyone in that room knew what she had done. And the truth that I had survived it. The lessons I learned if you're watching this, because you've been betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect you. Here's what I want you to know. First, the silence was never yours to carry. For 10 years, I thought if I just moved on, if I pretended it didn't happen, I would heal. But healing doesn't come from pretending. It comes from facing the truth, even when it hurts. Second, justice doesn't always look like a courtroom victory. Sometimes it looks like a confession. Sometimes it looks like a father saying, I was wrong, in a room full of lawyers. Sometimes it looks like a sister finally admitting what she knew. Justice is the moment the truth stops being a secret. Third, you can rebuild. I spent 10 years working double shifts, paying off loans, watching my sister live the life my money bought her. I thought I would never catch up, but I did. I graduated. I built a career. I created a life that was mine, not a compensation for what was stolen. And finally, family is not about blood. It's about who shows up. My grandparents showed up. They started this fight when they were too old and too tired to fight. They did it because they loved me. And in the end, that love was worth more than any amount of money. I don't talk to my mother much anymore. We exchange pleasantries on holidays, but the warmth is gone. My father calls every few months. He doesn't apologize each time. We've moved past that. But he asks how I'm doing, and I tell him, and we sit in the silence of two people who know the truth about each other. My sister took down the photos. She sent me a long email last year, saying she was sorry for more than just the money, for the years of pretending, for the silence, for the way she let our mother use her as a reason to hurt me. I wrote back that I forgave her. I meant it, not because she deserved it, but because carrying anger was heavier than letting it go. I used part of the settlement to pay off the last of my loans. I put the rest into a savings account, my own account in my name where no one else can touch it. Every time I look at the balance, I think of my grandfather. I think of his note. I think of the way he refused to let the truth die with him. He never got to see the settlement, but he saw the deposition. He saw my father confess. And before he passed, he told me, that's all I wanted. Not the money, just the truth. If you've ever been excluded by your family, if you've ever been told that your needs don't matter, if you've ever had to fight for the truth when everyone around you wanted to keep it buried, know that you're not alone. Subscribe to Secret Family Files for more stories where the truth finally comes to light. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have taken the settlement? Would you have pushed for more? Let me know in the comments below. I read everyone. And if you're still waiting for your family to admit what they did, waiting for them to say the words you need to hear, remember this: the truth has a way of coming out. Sometimes it takes 10 years. Sometimes it takes a lawyer. Sometimes it takes standing in a room and refusing to look away. But it comes. And when it does, you'll be ready.